Go ahead and call this joint workshop of the Planning, Development, and Zoning Commission and Manvel City Council to order. We are without 2 council members and 2 P, D, and Z members, but we do have a quorum. So if you guys would please join me in standing and saying the pledge. And then I would just like to take a moment of privilege here and just ask if we can all take a moment of silence. Today is 9/11, and it's a moment just to reflect and to remember the lives that were lost and the lives that were impacted by that day in 2001. So if you please join me with a moment of silence. Thank you. We now have a workshop here. I'll read off the first item on the workshop, kind of lay the groundwork for that, and then Dan, we'll turn it over to you. So it is discussion on the de-annexation of approximately 10 acres of land located in the city limits and generally bounded by the American Canal North, State Highway 288 East, Pomona Parkway South, and Big Island Drive West for SPG Land Investors LLC. So I think since I've lived in the city, this is only the second time that City Council and PD and Z have had a joint workshop. So I appreciate everybody being willing to have this. The SPG Land Investors LLC are looking to do some business on this land, and they requested an opportunity to have us join together to present their idea before they invested even more time and money in actually kicking off the process. They wanted to get our thoughts and feedback. And so what they're looking for tonight, after we have staff present and then the potential applicants present, is to have a discussion and guidance, any thoughts provided by either body. Just because we have quite a few of us squished up here like sardines, what we'll do is, from a housekeeping standpoint, after we have SPG Land Investors LLC present, if there's any questions or any comments, as we usually do, let's raise hands. I'll call on you. You'll have the floor to ask whatever questions, make whatever comments, and then we'll make sure to keep it orderly in that fashion. So with that, Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. And so you're right. This isn't as common as it is in other cities to have a joint workshop, but we at staff thought this would be appropriate. In fact, so appropriate, you have another one coming up here in a couple of weeks. So tonight, Council has invaded PD&Z's meeting. In a couple of weeks, we're going to ask PD&Z to invade Council's meeting for a different workshop. But the rationale is, so the project that's before you, that is potentially coming before you tonight, is a de-annexation. So they're asking to be removed out of the city limits. That doesn't happen very often, but there's a good reason for it. They are in a location along 288, on the west side of 288, just to the east of Pomona. So there's a sliver of land there, and the city cannot get utilities to them anytime soon, neither water nor sewer. Pomona can. They're right there. And so Pomona is happy to provide them with water and sewer in exchange for coming into their MUD. And we have an agreement already with MUD that we get it's a limited purpose annexation, right? And so we already get the sales tax as if they were in the city limits. So from the staff perspective, we don't necessarily have a concern to raise for you tonight, but this is certainly not a staff decision. It wouldn't even just be a PD&Z decision, although that is your body that you look to for recommendations. So as far as the order, the applicant wanted to come and talk to council, which is the right thing to do. Hey, what's your appetite for this? Is this something you would even be interested in? But the first thing that y'all would do is probably send them to PD&Z and have them kind of run the traps there. Well, so again, that's how we landed on the joint workshop. So that way you all get to hear the same story, and if council is interested in moving forward with this, then you can direct PD&Z while we're all here together. So hopefully the applicant's here, and we did ask Russ to stay as well. It's not a Pomona project, but it could be within Pomona if this goes correctly. So if our applicant's ready to come up and do their presentation.
Did you, oh, there it is. Okay. We've got the. How many copies we got?
We have 2.
Okay. Maybe we'll just do one. Do you want to hold on to one?
Yeah.
It's the same as what's up on the screen.
Clicker's here.
Okay. Do you want to? Go for it.
Do you want to?
Sure. I'll go ahead and just give a preliminary. So we're about 11.7 acres just west of 288, north of Pomona Parkway. They're looking to develop it as commercial and retail. The specifics of which, are up in the air. We want to make sure that the city is served well and the community is served well, and we make the city council happy with the ultimate decision, and that's why we're here. But we've got a few slides showing the site as a whole, and we'll go through that.
And I'm sorry, what are y'all's names?
Spencer Rivers, I'm sorry, with LJA Engineering.
Awesome.
I'm the civil engineer.
And Rodrigo Mendoza with Miracle Group, we're the architect. And Todd Blitzer with the Miracle Group.
Awesome. Thank you for being here, guys. Appreciate you putting this together and talking to us tonight.
And they've done the legwork on the site layout. We've got a site layout. We're right off the highway. I've been working with Pomona concurrently with their, make sure they have the utilities for the water and sewer as well as drainage. And they've been working hard on the site plan to make it look nice for the community. And I guess we'll go to the next slide. That's location if you're not sure where we're talking about. The site is broken up currently into about 4 tracks. The 5th track was actually donated to the Pomona Mud for signage. It's out there now. So we're left with 4 tracks. Total's about 11.7 acres. We look to combine it into one through the platting process, and then develop the site. So that's the layout. If it's subject to change, and we wanted to get any comments from P&Z or City Council on their thoughts of what is going to be built here. We've got some mini storage. We've got office and retail in the building to the left there, office retail to the south, and a small restaurant there as well. The site is in the floodplain, so the detention ponds are taking up a large portion of the property as a whole, but we've got that shown to scale, and I'm also working with TxDOT to get the site access right there off of 288. We're confident that we're going to be able to get that. I've been working with them for a while, and does anyone have any questions?
So just a few contextual questions. I believe you guys have taken this and presented this to the MUD because the MUD would be not obligated, but the MUD would be the entity that would provide water and wastewater to the facility. Can you give us a brief overview of where the MUD stands on this project?
So I've been working with the MUD. We've had a lot of discussions with them. We currently have a letter from them stating that they are open to annexing this property, subject to the city de-annexing it from us. We have not gone through with a full utility capacity analysis with them, but they have given us confidence that they have the capacity. They'll need to do a formal study, and their facilities, will run sanitary along Pomona Parkway up. See it.
I can speak on behalf of the district engineer, Brian, who works with LJ, the district engineer for Mount 39 and 40. So they have had conversations The utilities would come down Big Island Drive to serve the tract. The detention would be on site like it was shown here. The MUD district is open to annexation with a few conditions. It's ultimately their decision, but just discussions that they've had. They would have some conditions. Some of that would be what the land use would be, and some of it would be making sure that it meets the Pomona architectural design guidelines. So those are a couple of the conditions that they've set for this annexation. But the first step is for the city to de-annex, and then the MUD can annex. We did something very similar with Section 17, which is just to the west with that big pond there. So that was one of Hillwood's projects, and that was de-annexed by the city and then annexed by the MUD soon thereafter. And then Hillwood developed it to single family. So yes, the MUD is open. They wanted to find out if the city was open because both parties have to work together to make this happen.
I feel like I need to give Russ a vowel so that way he can turn a letter for me over there. I'm sorry. That's all that I could think of when you were pointing. I appreciate that, Brian. Just a few more contextualized questions here. Big Island Drive, who's responsible? The development.
So Dan can probably speak to this, one of the city requirements is when you plat against adjacent from existing right-of-way, you have to approve your portion of that road. Now, property, full 11 acres, it does have road easement along the western boundary, but it doesn't have any frontage along Big Island Drive, the part that you're talking about, that's asphalt. So I think that would have to be worked out, probably with the MUD district and how the annexation is going to work out. But they're going to have their primary access off 288 hopefully on their secondary track. But from a city requirement standpoint, we're only responsible for the road easement that's behind it.
Appreciate that. Just two more questions here. One, I like the original plans had the building that represents the mini warehouses where the bigger detention pond's at. So I like how that's shifted around to where the retail in the front along the feeder road covers some of the mini warehouse. But for the mini warehouse, is that proposed to be a multi-story facility, single story? What are some of the thoughts that are going in behind that building?
Well, I would say that one of the originally we had the storage facility towards the left, towards the south. And in response to some concerns about that, that's why we went and put the detention pond on the south side of the property to create it as a water feature. We have some other views. We're having some trouble scrolling through to show the other views, but it is in the packet where, there we go. Okay. So we treat it from an aesthetics perspective regarding how the whole detention pond or the water facility is perceived, even to the point where when we drive in off the freeway, there's a driveway leading towards Big Island Drive and almost creating like a bridge effect between the water. And so even the restaurant being proposed looks out onto the water, and then the retail itself is also visible from not only from 288 but also as you approach off the freeway and cross over the bridge to the retail. We put proposing the storage to be in the back corner of the property so it's not visible from the street. And right now, we're only proposing a single-story storage facility. What's being proposed is not necessarily a multi-storage facility, and if it would be more than, if that was acceptable, then it may not be more than 2 stories for that facility. But tucked back in the corner so that it doesn't negatively impact visibility with regards to the approach towards Pomona and also along 288.
I appreciate that. Thank you for that insight and that explanation. Last question I have, and this might be geared more towards Dan, Bobby, and Jessica. If PD&Z ultimately recommends, and then council ultimately votes on approving the de-annexation, what authority do we have as a municipality regarding the regulation of land use into any sort of de-annexation agreement? Because right now this is all, I like you guys, nothing personal against y'all, but this is all, in theory. So we could approve the de-annexation, and then you say, you know what, we're going to go and we're going to do a big, 2 gas stations on the same property. We have no say at that point if we de-annex. So what sort of local control would we have in that manner.
Well, part of it is our development agreement with Pomona, so that's one good thing is that, we already have an established relationship with them and an established development agreement, so there are parameters already built into that. I don't, Jessica maybe could talk more about that.
We would probably ask that we update that agreement because I'm not entirely sure that, I think Pomona talks about just commercial uses, but you guys never have been commercial developers, not putting in some of those specific uses. So that's something that we'd want to update if these uses are, something that the planning and zoning and city council want to agree to.
Yeah, and if I might add, those are some of the same thoughts that the MUD district has as well. And so I think we would be very tight with some of our land uses. This is at the front door of Pomona, and so we want to, while they're not Pomona, we want to make it look and feel like you are entering Pomona, and so it's got to be elevated in that manner.
I appreciate. So I would assume, Jessica, for that, you would see these kind of come at the same time before PD&C and then before council, kind of whatever needs to happen to de-annex, development agreement, et cetera, all wrapped up with a pretty bow on top.
Yes, sir.
All right, sounds good. All right, sorry, y'all. I don't mean to hog up all the time. I just had a few questions there. So does anybody on council or PD&Z have any questions or comments?
Can you go back to the slide that actually has the entrance and everything? I think it's forward.
That one?
That one. I mean, the only thing I see a problem with in the future is your fire and EMS access. Because if it's burning in the front or burning in the back, depending on which way you got to get to it, I mean, and Acre should know that, but all his years of fire and everything else he's dealt with, that kind of getting to some of that would be a nightmare for fire, at least if something's on fire. And I hate to say nothing will ever catch on fire, but
Yeah, so we're limited to where we can access the development from 288 with regards to TxDOT's requirements. But there would be fire lanes and loops around there to go ahead and accommodate access for fire apparatus to be able to fight a fire should there be a concern or an issue with that.
yeah, but you're basing on everything, a car not parked in the way and a fire truck not running over it.
Well, the lanes will
So-
be wide enough to be in compliance with that,
Yeah.
the fire lane. And that's why we have a loop completely around the buildings, along the west side and north and around the buildings themselves independently to provide for that freedom of access in case of emergency.
Because, I mean, TxDOT's only going to give one access anyway from 288. So,
Question based off of Kyle. So that, looking at this, the orientation of this picture, that northern strip between Big Island Drive and Big Island Drive, or between the development and Big Island Drive, do you guys own that? Would you guys own that? Or is that outside of the development at that
Which
point?
strip are you referring to, towards the right?
North, so kind of behind where the mini warehouse would be, you
Right,
see there's
between the warehouse and the canal that's there?
the warehouse and the road.
Towards the west?
Technically the west side, yeah.
Northwest corner.
Yeah, northwest corner, that's
Yeah.
part of the property as far as I
Okay.
understand. And that's a buffer that we put in there at that location. It wasn't, truthfully, it's not entirely clear with the survey information we have right now as far as exactly where the property line is or where as far as the road right of way. But what's being proposed is providing a buffer in there between the development and to the west, and then also having it landscaped and screened with trees and such. So, I mean, the intent of the development really, Pomona is a beautiful residential enclave. And really, it's really looking at designing a retail development to complement what's there currently. And thus the approach being aesthetically appealing as well as the end product with regards to retailers being able to help support the community that's there.
No, it makes sense. And just maybe a factor of consideration might be adding an alternate access point that's reserved for emergency purposes.
Oh, you mean like the northwest corner?
Yeah, the northwest
Certainly
corner.
That could be done.
Might
Right
be.
now, that road, Big Island Drive, as you head north towards that, it turns into a gravel road and nice no trespassing signs there as well too. But I think that's certainly a viable option of being able to go ahead and provide additional access at the northwest corner.
Absolutely.
That'd be very easy to do that.
Yes, sir.
So with our most recent technical code amendments, the fire code, anything that's 5,000 square feet or larger, regardless of occupancy, requires a fire sprinkler system. So I just wanted to throw that out there since there was a concern that was brought about it.
That's a great question, Kyle. Appreciate you bringing that up. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Ryan?
I guess the only question I have, the road at the top of the screen there, that's Big Island Drive, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, who owns or is responsible for the right of way of that?
Yeah, totally sure.
Yeah. We've looked at these tracks behind this development for a long time. That is just a road easement. It's one of those 40-foot road easements that's been platted for a long time, and it is a gravel road at best.
Yeah, that was something that needed to be worked out as, should the development move forward as far as how that gets improved.
And it's my understanding that because of that easement, that our developer would have some sort of obligation to, half of that easement is on our property, so we would have to either pay for it all to improve that up to our development. So that's definitely in our plans to do. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, with what you understand. Per the city's requirements, the developer would be responsible for their half of that road. Often it's difficult to build one half of a road. So in the past, there's been money set aside for the improvement of that road, but all that could be worked out with amendments to the building.
Yeah, and I'll just add that when we de-annexed the Section 17, what we call, right off of Big Island, we improved Big Island up to a certain point, and then we escrowed money to the city for half of Big Island for the property that we own. So the city does have a little bit of funds, for that, but certainly not the property. So something to consider.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I would like to see what's up in the, let's see, I guess that would be the southwest corner, Big Island, where it goes off the corner of the page up there. What kind of road access and issues we may have that's not shown here on this photograph?
So that portion of Big Island, there's basically a little cul-de-sac right there, what you're seeing in the north, or the top right of the screen, southwest corner of the property. So that's an asphalt 2-lane road that runs west to Pomona Parkway. As Russ mentioned, part of that is crude concrete curb and gutter, and then the rest of it is asphalt. It's got roadside ditch right there.
Could you bring that up? Would you mind?
So we've got an improved road
Up to right there, okay.
And then it's a 2-lane asphalt
Okay,
all the way back to that cul-de-sac that's there.
okay.
From there, it's a gravel road.
And
And then when you go north, it's kind of a gravel road.
okay, and these are obviously lots, these are home, so this is going through a subdivision to get to the backside that way.
That's right.
Is that a private residence that's right there on that?
It is, yeah, so there's a private residence here. There's a residence that's on the lake here. There's a big, looks like a storage facility right here. There was a trailer here, but they've taken that off. And then there's some containers back here for storage.
Do you,
So there's not a lot of traffic on this.
Yeah.
well, yeah, I think there will be though, but do you own this part here?
No, we do not.
Okay,
We own kind of, you see this outline right here called OS, that's us. And that's
Okay.
for our signage, for the Pomona signage right there on 288.
so there's probably no way to make a connection from here into here.
No, in fact, TxDOT has the control of access there. And they were going to buy this sort of green building here, but the guy got a little too greedy and decided to turn the road and basically turn their back and would not allow a connection to that TxDOT jug handle. Yeah, it's complicated.
That's my only concern really, is the access in and out of this thing. With, what, 50, over 55,000 square feet of office and many. But this canal here, I mean, that kills this side, so, thank you.
Those are good comments, Councilman, and there's, I think, an opportunity to look at the amendments to the development agreement and also the conversations that might happen, Brian, with the MUD as to what sort of
I feel sorry for
layout that might look like from a
Yeah.
street infrastructure standpoint.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments, Council, PD&Z? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have one. So we assume that TxDOT will approve your plan, access from the feeder. So, and if Manvel City approved this de-annexation, some reason, if the TxDOT, they said that, no, we're not approving it. So you're off the hook from the city anyway, because the city has already approved your de-annexation. So what would be happen actually that time? Is there any things we can hold them up for this?
Well, and I don't mean to speak here for y'all, but I don't know if you would necessarily want to go forward with the development if you don't have that TxDOT access. To me, it would seem very cost prohibitive at that point if you don't have access right off of the feeder and you miss out on that flow. So then the only way for people to get it is from the back. And I would have concerns about that, speaking from just a practical business perspective. But that's something that they would have to evaluate.
Well, right now, currently, as a team with LG Engineering and as Miracle Group, we've moved the entrance actually further to the south in order to be more in compliance with TxDOT's requirements. So at this point, we don't see any reason why TxDOT would deny this from being able to do this. And yes, if for some reason TxDOT woke up one day and said, this isn't going to work for us, we can't have access to it, then having just access off of, from the community side would not be very practical as a development. I mean, although this would be serving predominantly, I think, the residential community in Pomona, but they're also relying heavily also on traffic from exiting from the freeway.
Well, if you guys get a Chick-fil-A, I'm sure a lot more people are going to frequent it. So just throwing that out there.
With a nice view of the
Exactly. Mohammed, any other
No,
questions?
that means that, just as an example, so, but that times you are off the hook from the city. Am I correct? After you get approval from the de-annexation, you would be off the hook from the city. And now, TxDOT is not approving it. So I understand you're not going to do that, but what's going to happen to the property then? You're not in the part of the city. You're just independent, small piece of land, 11 acres, sit down here, there without not a city.
Well, it still would be part of the MUD, and if it's not developed as residential, then it's pretty much becomes undevelopable property at that point. It remains as it is as far as a wooded lot.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think the question there is if for some reason TxDOT does not allow them to have access, the MUD would still have, and it is de-annexed from the city. At that point, the de-annexation is really on the mere fact that the MUD would annex it and would have it annexed into the MUD, which we have an agreement in years to come that the city would then annex it within the city limits. So eventually, as long as it's with the MUD, you get it back. It just depends on timing. Now, it depends on what state that you get it back in. If he is able to secure that driveway access, then you're going to get it in a much better state than if he didn't. Then it might end up turning into maybe some residential or something like that. But it's far more useful with the driveway. And if he doesn't get annexed into the MUD, let's just go down that route, and he's able to get de-annexed from the city, he doesn't have anybody to serve him now at all. He'll have to serve himself, and that gets quite expensive. So I think really the route that needs to happen is, assuming he complies with even the MUD's wishes, is to get de-annexed, get annexed into the MUD district, comply with all the development regulations, meaning architectural, making sure that they've got points of access appropriately. Obviously, because our agreement calls for commercial development to go through the city of Manvel permitting, so you would get to look through all of those plans and to get to permit everything. So it would like he would be in the city, just have to pay mud taxes until you guys annex that property.
You know, one of the advantages of being able to de-annex it now is that it gives the opportunity for the development to actually move forward, actually even generating property taxes for the city, because of the mud that then be available to be able to provide utilities, both water, sanitary, sewer. And you know, eventually, like what Russ was saying, eventually it would become, since part of Pomona, essentially, it would become part of City of Manvel sometime in the future. What it's doing is it's accelerating that process of developing this land. If it doesn't get developed, if it's not de-annexed, and then it doesn't get annexed into the mud, and we don't have access to utilities, then the project doesn't get developed at all, and it stays in its current state for perpetuity until the utilities are provided to the property, whether that be by the city of Manvel that eventually extends into that area, or other measures occur. But the idea of having even septic and well on that property to serve, and detention to serve the property as a standalone piece of property, it's not very practical to do that.
My question was, you've answered a little bit of it, Russ. The next thing is, if y'all will be considered our ETJ, so y'all will still use our police and fire, the tax ramifications versus building versus not building. I like the fact that you are thinking ahead. How do we know, or is there some kind of guarantee that the Pomona Mud will give you this if we de-annex it? I mean, is there, whether it be a handshake, I mean, I would like to see it go forward, but I don't want just empty land sitting there either if we de-annex it. We don't make any money off of that land.
I love handshakes, but what's better than a handshake is a written agreement. And that's how everything is done. And so in that agreement, we would write and stipulate that the mud would serve the property in accordance with and in compliance with the Pomona resident, or the Pomona commercial guidelines. And so, again, we want this to look and feel as much like Pomona as we can, because it is at the front of our door, because we also feel like we have really good commercial guidelines. And I think that should give the city a little bit of security, a little bit of comfort. While it's not my land and I didn't sell it and I don't have full control, we've got about as good a control as anybody can ask for. And I think that should give you that level of surety and comfort that you've come to hopefully have known in the Pomona development itself. And just a point of clarification, because we're in the ETJ, we actually don't get served by Manvel for fire or police, while we would love to, and I think Mr. Traylor does a great job. We're in the ETJ, and so we rely on Brazoria County and the local ESD number 3 for those services.
Yeah, and that's the point of clarification. I think, Dan, you picked up on that. So they do not get our fire marshal services, but they do get the ESD fire and ambulance services.
But they also have to go through our permit process.
Correct. Yes,
And
ma'am.
what that does, the advantage to that is for you all, is that you know what's being built is in compliance with your codes and regulations. So when the property is eventually annexed back into the city of Manvel, you know that the buildings are going to be in compliance with your current codes and regulations, as opposed to taking on a piece of property that isn't in compliance and creates other potential issues in the future. And so we're talking about creating a quality development that complements Pomona, but also is something in the long term is an asset for the city as well, too, as supporting and providing services to its constituents.
And to hit on some of the sentiment, there's two things that I'd like everybody to consider. One is that the last thing I think any of us want that's sitting up here right now is that if the city moves to de-annex the property, but then the mud does not annex the property, that technically would then leave it out there floating within the county at that point. So we would want to, I know our favorite word right now is claw back, so would want the ability to claw back, saying, okay, if the mud for whatever reason chooses not to take it, boom, you're back. in city limits. The other thing that I want to make sure that as we work on this development agreement, if there's any sort of guardrails that we can put in there to ensure that it's not a bait and switch, that regulate the land use, almost similar to what you might do with a PUD. If there's the ability to put that within the development agreement, legally, of course, all on the up and up, but working with Russ, Pomona, the MUD, with you guys, with all of us on that, I think that makes sure that we protect the city's best interest in the long run as well.
Yeah, I think your idea of, as a callback measure, where if you're able to write that in the development agreement, where then it becomes part of, de-annexes from City Manvel for some reason, isn't admitted into the MUD, that you're able to go and bring that back if you're able to use that as a vehicle in which to make that take place. And then also regarding the restrictions, often find that, as opposed to, it's probably inclusionary restrictions may be the best way to go about doing it, listing the items that you don't want to see there, for instance, and as opposed to trying to list everything that can be there.
Absolutely. And I saw you talking over there, maybe shaking your head a little bit, Bobby, about the ability of the club. We'll talk about that. I'm watching you. I'm making sure we're good. So, but we can work through those items, absolutely.
And I think the MUD could make annexing into the district subject to successful de-annexation from the city to where that it's almost a simultaneous occurrence. That way it doesn't leave the chance of it being in, call it no man's land for a period of time.
No, we can't. There's already a place in Manvel called that. We can't take that name. We can't take that name. Well, any other questions or comments from anything from staff? No? Okay.
If I could just, as to close out Mohammed's concerns on the text, I do feel confident. I wish I had a text permit with me today to show y'all, but I've been working with them for a while, and I've got strong confidence that we're going to get the driveway. And it takes a long time for TxDOT, and we're right in the middle of it. So I just wanted to.
May the odds be in your favor. Yeah, that's for sure. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I appreciate the presentation. What we'll do is we'll move on. Thank you, guys. We'll move on to workshop item number 2, discussion presentation on the zoning ordinance. Dan, turn it over to you first.
And I'm going to turn it over to Jessica quickly.
So we have some amendments that we're going to be bringing to you regarding the zoning ordinance. Those have to do with some recent changes at the state legislature, one specifically with Senate Bill 929, which talks about legal nonconformities. There's some language that's in state law that basically says that if the city were to create any nonconformity through its zoning ordinance, that we will have to compensate for that nonconformity. The other item that we were talking about, we have fences within the zoning ordinance. It's been brought up through channels through council that we would like to see a fence permit for the city. And we've kind of some things of late, some fences in the city don't necessarily, they lack the integrity to stay standing. So we're going to find a way to put that in within the zoning ordinance. And then lastly, we have some facade restrictions that we put on new buildings, commercial buildings that are being constructed. We currently have an overlay district that is on Highway 6 that we do enforce facade regulations. But at one point in time prior to during 2019, it applied to any commercial development in the city. House Bill 2439 basically preempted all city regulations on facade requirements. So we haven't been enforcing them. So if you're doing a commercial development here on South Masters or maybe 1128, you can pretty much do whatever you want to do on that. So we've kept it in the ordinance all this time in hopes that maybe the state legislature would change their minds. They haven't changed their minds, so we were going to clean this up and remove it from the ordinance. So.
Thank you for that overview, Jessica. And Bobby and Jessica have both been working and looking through the past 2 legislative sessions to see what the state has changed, what they've preempted in some areas in order to clean up our local codes to reflect the state codes, state law, so that way there's no confusion or misunderstanding about what's going on. And so Jessica, Bobby, appreciate y'all's work on that, and anyone else that's helped you guys out there. And so for PD and Z and council, as we start to work through some of these zoning ordinance changes, if there's anything else that you guys think that might be prudent for us to consider, since we're peeling this back a little bit right now, definitely bring that up to Dan, and let's have that conversation. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Jessica and the team?
Sorry, but, so along TxDOT roads, we do not have the ability to tell a building that they need this type of frontage or facade or this type, it's whatever they want to put up, they can put up?
That is correct. So that House bill, because it preempted local regulations. Now, the city has a lot of different developments. We have DeBella Lakes, we have Pomona that we just talked about, even though they're in our ETJ. And within those development agreements or within those PUDs, we've put regulations that are either similar to what we have in the zoning ordinance or very, very close to that. So that's why some of these in our larger developments, you're not seeing anything that's maybe just an all-metal building. It's going to come up eventually, but we have large portions of the city that are either governed by a planned unit development or in some sort of large development agreement like Pomona, Sedona Lakes, South Fork also. So anything that you would see within South Fork has that too, Magnolia Parkway, although we haven't done anything recently there. But yeah, so essentially we have a lot of commercial development here on 1128, and we're not allowed to enforce it. We ask people, it'd be nice if you did. And a lot of people want it to look nice. It's just whatever. That's kind of in the eye of the beholder, kind of like artwork.
You gotta love Austin sometimes. You gotta love Austin, but there's ways, to encourage and incentivize certain behaviors. And we have the Highway 6, as Jessica mentioned, the Highway 6 overlay district. That when you have that special district in place, you can still have above and beyond what the state regulates from a facade standpoint. But there was a lot of pushback by municipalities because what might be suitable up in Dallas from a facade, us being on the Gulf or Galveston being an island, doesn't necessarily work. You want the ability to have a little bit more strict facades because of the wear and tear with the weather and the salt in the air. But Austin said that they'll do what they think is best. So I'll leave it at that. Any other comments or questions from anyone? No. Okay, so what we'll do is we will close this joint workshop at, well, actually, I need a motion to adjourn. Do I have a motion?
I'll give you a motion to adjourn.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? All those opposed? Passes unanimously. What is that, like 10-0, something like that? 10-0. And then what I'll do is I will gavel back in the special city council workshop at 6:48 p.m. And we will enter into executive session. Mr. Morrow, if you're able to join us. City Council will convene into executive session pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.087, deliberation regarding economic development negotiation, discuss 380 agreement with MUD 83 and Hillwood Enterprises. Thank you, everyone, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, sir.